You're listening to Food Integrity Now with your host, Carol Greve.
Hello and welcome to Food Integrity Now. I'm Carol Greve, your host today. At Food Integrity Now, we envision a healthy, sustainable world. A world where our food is nourishing and our mind, body, and spirit can thrive. If you share this vision, go to our website and join us. My guest today is F. William Engdahl. Mr. Engdahl is a researcher, economist, analyst, columnist, and author. He has written on issues of energy, economics, and geopolitics. He is one of the more widely discussed analysts of current political and economic developments, and his provocative articles have appeared in numerous newspapers and magazines and well-known international websites. One of the reasons that I wanted to have William on the show today is he never talks about anything or writes about anything that he hasn't meticulously researched. He is also an author of several books, and today we're going to be talking with him about his book, which was published in 2007, called Seeds of Destruction: The Hidden Agenda of Genetic Manipulation. We're going to be speaking with him today from his home in Germany. William, welcome to Food Integrity Now.
Well, thank you, Carol. I'm glad to be with you again.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on our show today. Over the past several weeks, I've interviewed some pretty interesting guests. I had Howard Vlieger, who's a third-generation farmer, and he co-authored the GMO pig study with Dr. Judy Carman. And then last week, I interviewed Dr. Don Huber, who's Professor Emeritus of Plant Pathology at Purdue University. And he spoke about the effects of GMOs and glyphosate and the effect of them on the environment as well as our human health. We got all the latest and greatest information as we have it from a scientific perspective. Today, I would love for you to share with us about the history of genetic manipulation and how we've gotten to where we are today with almost all of our corn, canola, soy, cotton, and sugar beets, so that our grocery stores are filled with, in the U.S., about 85% of the products are genetically modified. And we also know a lot more about glyphosate. We know that it's not just a pesticide, but it's also a mineral chelator and a patented antibiotic. And it's very toxic. Can you give us the history of how we've gotten to where we are today with GMOs?
Well, to really understand how this Frankenstein monster has been let free on the American public as well as on a good chunk of the world, although there's huge resistance in Europe and Asia and Africa and elsewhere still, fortunately, you have to go back to a family that made an obscene fortune back in the early part of the last century by creating a monopoly or a cartel controlling petroleum. That was the Standard Oil group of companies that was controlled by the Rockefeller family. And in 1913, the Rockefellers took their billions of dollars, and billions of dollars in 1913 was a staggering sum. They took that and put it into a tax-free foundation called the Rockefeller Foundation. And they set out to create an image, but only an image, of doing good, taking their huge profits, their obscene profits from controlling the oil market, and rolling that back into charitable enterprises such as the takeover of American medicine by the pharmaceutical industry, whose stock shares were largely controlled by Rockefeller or other related groups, financial groups and banks, and so forth. Well, the Rockefellers were obsessed with something called eugenics. Eugenics is, well, there are two kinds of eugenics. There's positive eugenics, as they put it, where you try to improve the breed, like you breed thoroughbred horses. In fact, part of the eugenics movement came out of horse breeding by wealthy families, royal families in England and elsewhere. in the United States, the Kentucky Derby, those kind of things. The other kind of eugenics is negative eugenics, where you get rid of the worst of the breed. Now, these people are talking about the human, not breed, but the human species, the human race. And these extremely, obscenely wealthy people, I have to add here something, that they're, to my mind, extremely paranoid that the majority of the population will one day wake up and realize that these characters have robbed them blind and demand a fair share of the loot that they've stolen from the greater population. So they try all sorts of things to control the 99% of the population that's not billionaires like Rockefellers. Well, they financed something called the eugenics movement, and some people might know that eugenics was the name of the race science that Adolf Hitler's Third Reich in Nazi Germany practiced. Josef Mengele, Dr. Death, the Nazi doctors in the Auschwitz and Buchenwald and the various death camps that the Nazis maintained. Well, what most people don't know is that the eugenics research of the Nazis, right up until the outbreak of World War II, in 1939, was financed by the Rockefeller Foundation. And they would come back. They would send people from the foundation over to Berlin to get a first-hand report about what the eugenics research at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute was accomplishing, forced sterilization of lesser intelligent Germans and whatnot, or gypsies or whoever. They come back and say, unfortunately, the Third Reich, the Nazis, have such a bad press in the world because they're doing what we only talk about doing. They're putting their money where their mouth is and forcing sterilization of inferior people and all these other horrendous things. Well, after the war, of course, the Nuremberg trials and all these horrendous things that the Nazis did to Jews and others came to light. And the chairman of the American Eugenics Society, who was a Rockefeller crony, intimate Rockefeller friend, got up and said, from today, the new name of eugenics is genetics. And that, in a nutshell, is what genetic manipulation comes from. It's the idea of taking, it's a reductivist, absurd idea, it's scientifically fraudulent, but who cares about that when you have the money of Monsanto and the U.S. government pushing this thing, or Rockefeller foundations. The idea that you can reduce the complexities of life, the energetic and biological complexities of life, to a single gene or DNA structure, and then zero in on that gene and shoot it with a cannon that has foreign material, Bacillus thuringiensis, or other foreign materials, in a completely unnatural manner, and change the genetic trait of that particular plant or animal, even in the case of Dolly the sheep. Well, that has been the dream of the Rockefeller and the eugenics movement for decades, the idea that you can improve and breed a master race and that you can genetically eliminate billions, and I'm not exaggerating, Ted Turner has said this in an interview back in the 90s, billions of people from this planet through genetic manipulation and various other manipulations of the food that we eat. So that, in essence, is the heart and the history of GMO.
Okay, so how have they pulled this off?
Well, they did it with very clever PR, public relations. They started, Rockefellers created an institute in the Philippines decades ago called the International Rice Research Institute. Mm-hmm. And there, the Rockefellers financed a project to genetically modify the basic food staple of the majority of human beings on this planet in India, Pakistan, China, and so forth, namely rice. And they spent more than $100 million over a period of about a decade trying to genetically alter the trait of rice. And as a PR gimmick, They said they were altering the rice so that it had enhanced vitamin A, so that infant blindness of poor people in Asia would become a thing of the past. Well, after $100 million investment by the Rockefellers, first of all, the rice turned out excuse my French here, but a puke-colored yellow. And it didn't look very appetizing, to be honest. So they put the PR geniuses to work and decided to call it golden rice. Well, golden rice, wow, that sounds, gold has a kind of a magic quality in the human imagination. So they called it golden rice and said this will cure infant blindness. Well, someone got a hold of a sample of this golden rice and did a laboratory test and came up with the conclusion that for an infant, a newborn infant, to have enough vitamin A from this GMO rice, they would have to eat 8 kilograms. That's like 16 pounds of rice every day. I mean, it's just a joke. So this thing was a PR stunt to try to sell much of Asia on the idea of GMO rice. It more or less flopped. But then we had something, a real criminal element added to this soap opera back in 1992 when the leadership of Monsanto, the biggest GMO proliferator on the planet today, I guess you want to call it, Monsanto came up from St. Louis and had a closed-door meeting in the White House with President George Herbert Walker Bush Sr., Daddy Bush, and out of that meeting came an agreement from Bush that no government agency, and this is something that listeners really have to reflect on and digest because this is criminal. If we had honest judges and courts of law, George Herbert Walker Bush would be behind bars for what he's done to the population by passing the doctrine of substantial equivalence as U.S. government policy. Basically what that meant, and it was given to him by Monsanto's lawyers, Monsanto argued that GMO corn is substantially equivalent to non-GMO, to normal corn. If you take an ear of GMO corn, it's yellow, it has kernels, it has green husks like normal corn, and it's about the same size. So it looks like corn, it kind of tastes like corn, it smells like corn. So we'll say it's substantially equivalent. Now, let's deconstruct that term. Substantial means kind of. It means more or less. It doesn't mean equivalent. Equivalent means $100 equal $100 plus minus zero. Equivalent means equal. So you can't have something at the same time roughly equal and equal. But they got that thing through by a legal fraud through George Papa Bush, that no government agency, not the Food and Drug Administration, not the U.S. Department of Agriculture, not the National Institutes of Health, no one is allowed independently to test for health and safety of the American animal population or human population of GMO products. The tests are given to the government by Monsanto and the GMO mafia. They're given to the government. In several instances, whistleblowers have gone public and said, Monsanto told us to fake the results of our tests so that the deaths of certain rats would not show up in the statistics, so it would seem to be safe, etc. So, you're letting the fox guard the hen house in the case of GMO in Washington. There are no labeling allowed. It's forbidden to label a product in the United States of America containing GMO or being GMO-free, either one. You can't do it. So the government will come after you. So
I want to say something that I've learned recently, and I never really thought about this until I was discussing this with Dr. Huber. Few tests that Monsanto has done on GMOs, they have been supposedly looking for acute toxins. And the problem is that glyphosate is a chronic toxin. So there's a big difference there. And, as we know, GMOs don't kill you overnight yet, but they will chronically, create disease and all of that.
Well, they accumulate in the system.
Right. They're
as far as I know.
Yeah. So that's so interesting because they've kind of fooled the public into thinking that they've done some testing. In essence, they haven't.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is Monsanto and Scientific American did an editorial sounding the alarm about this years ago, but nothing changed. The fact that Monsanto refuses to allow independent scientists to run tests with rats on GMO Monsanto seeds. And all the other DuPont and Dow, the same. It's just you are going to be sued up the wazoo if you illegally take Monsanto seeds. You have to get written permission, and they won't give the permission. They don't want any independent tests. Let me give you an example here, and this hopefully scares the living daylights out of your listeners so that they begin to realize how dangerous this is. Professor Gilles-Éric Seralini and a group of scientists at Caen University in France did the first ever, 20 years after this toxic waste was dumped on the human population in America and Argentina and elsewhere in the world, 20 years after the commercialization of GMO plants, the first long-term, that is 2-year-long, study of the effects of GMO diet on rats was carried out by Seralini's group in France. They did it with stealth because they knew that the Monsanto lobby was so powerful in the media and elsewhere that they would torpedo the study. So they managed to surprise the world by having the article, the 2-year tests on rats, peer-reviewed in the Journal of Food and Toxicology, an Elsevier publication out of Holland, then a very respected, today no longer in my view, Scientific Journal of Toxicology and Food. And the results of the Seralini tests, the first ever long-term study of control rats versus GMO-fed rats versus GMO-fed rats plus Roundup, which is glyphosate plus. It's not just glyphosate. It's a toxic cocktail of proprietary chemicals that Monsanto refuses to divulge to the public, so we know what in combination with glyphosate, what interactions are occurring. We can't test it. Well, Seralini's group did this. They published the results. The rats fed GMO over the 2-year period. First of all, Monsanto's tests, all of them, industry tests, only run 90 days. They stop at 90 days. Well, what Seralini's group found is that after 4 and 5 months, the first cancer tumors began to appear in the rats fed GMO. And the mortality rates after that began to explode, that is, the death rates. The liver disease, the organ malfunctions and so forth, all of that began to appear after 4, 5, 6, 7 months. And you had a 500% greater death rate in the GMO rats fed Monsanto corn than you did in non-GMO rats. That's pretty scary stuff. When that thing appeared, it was like the death knell for Monsanto, except for the fact that Monsanto has a PR machine that is even more awesome than the Pentagon's PR machine to spin lies to the public. And they managed to bury the thing with fraudulent claims that it was unscientific methodology, which it wasn't at all. So that just gives you an idea.
Right, and they tried to do the same with Howard Vlieger and Dr. Judy Carmen's pig study, which was a pretty telling study. And,
it was a frightening study, yeah. I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. Eugenics and genetics. They interchanged that word because it sounds better. The word eugenics is what comes to mind when you say eugenics is definitely the Nazis.
Yeah, the Nazis forced sterilization, the whole shebang, and that's what. And let me elaborate that more concretely in terms of GMO with an example. There was a company in San Diego, California. It's now in North Carolina somewhere, in the Research Triangle in North Carolina, taken over by another biotech company. But there was a company called Episeat in San Diego. In 2001, when much of the world was focused on a bearded crazy named Osama bin Laden and Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda and so forth. This little company called Episeed held a press conference, and they announced with great pride that they had come up with a solution to world overpopulation, quote unquote. And the president of Episeed pointed behind him and said, "Behind me is a hot greenhouse full of spermicidal corn." Now, what they had done is genetically manipulated normal corn so that if a male human ate that corn, his sperm would be killed. He would not be able to conceive a child. And given the fact that much of Latin America is, just like Asia is on a rice basis diet, much of Latin America is on a corn basis diet. You have a wonderful way, as some people would see it, of abruptly changing the birth rates of people eating corn as a staple. So, and that project was supported by research money from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the United States government.
Wow. Whatever happened to that corn?
The corn, we don't know. We don't know because it was, they signed license agreements with, I believe it was either Dow or DuPont GMO subsidiaries to license the technology worldwide. Of course, those companies are not going to, broadcast it to the world that they've got this spermicidal corn that they're selling to Mexican citizens or whatever, or even Americans. If you go to a Mexican restaurant and eat tortillas made out of corn, so we don't know. It was bought. It was bought by a high-tech biotech company in North Carolina, and it disappeared from the radar. I spent days trying to track down further news about this. I think that the government, for tactical reasons, put a news blackout on this development. It's like Terminator. In 1999, Monsanto was going to buy a company in Mississippi that had patented Terminator Technology, genetic use restriction technology, technically called.
Oh, that was Delta and Pineland.
Yeah, Delta and Pineland. And Delta and Pineland, the president of the Rockefeller Foundation went to Monsanto and said, there's such an uproar from Greenpeace and all the NGOs, that are into the green, against this Terminator. They called it Terminator Technology. It threatens the whole GMO project. Cool your heels, Monsanto. Let it sit for a while and tell the world you're not going to do it. So they did it. They said, we're not going to take over this company. We're not going to commercialize Terminator Technology. What did they do? In 2007, when everybody had forgotten about Delta and Pineland, everybody forgot about Terminator, Monsanto issued an innocent little press release saying, Monsanto has just taken over a small company in Mississippi called Delta and Pineland, which has great innovations in cotton seeds. They didn't talk about Terminator, but the Terminator patent was still held by Delta and Pineland, and, this is the killer, and by the U.S. government. The co-patent holder is the U.S. government. So the U.S. government is complicit in promoting Terminator Technology now with Monsanto. So it's a cute little incestuous kind of thing going on there in Washington.
And so that Terminator Technology, in essence, means that if a farmer plants seeds at the end of the growing season, that seed would actually terminate and can't be replanted.
Precisely, yeah. It commits suicide.
Right.
So you can't, as farmers have done for 5,000 years or longer, you can't save a portion of your seeds and use it for the next planting season. It's dead, and you've got to go back to Monsanto. And, that's the ultimate in kind of a new serfdom for farmers.
So you not only have to go back and buy your seeds, but you have to buy the chemicals that they sell.
You have to buy the poisons, the herbicides, the weed killers. The world's leading is Roundup from Monsanto, and that Seralini's group has done tests on that, and that has been shown to, in tiny concentrations, less than that recommended for the normal backyard garden Roundup has been demonstrated in tests to kill cells in a human embryo. That's kind of scary.
Exactly. I'd like you to talk for a moment about when you spoke at the Vatican and what happened with the Pontifical Academy of Science there.
Oh.
And you can talk about your book, Seeds of Destruction.
Seeds of Destruction.
Yeah, and we'll let William tell you about his other books in just a moment. But tell us about the Vatican.
Well, it wasn't the Vatican. It was a lay organization of the Catholic Church, a group of priests from around the world, I think 100 some odd countries, formed or created to support family values and procreation and so forth. And the head of this from Delaware got a hold of my book through some means or another, I don't know, but someone gave it to him. He read the book, and I learned about this only after he said, "You must come to our conference in Rome." It was in the days, at that point it was 2008, and if you recall, there was an explosion of the price of rice and all grains on the world market, such that poor people were simply being priced out of the market for the basic foodstuffs, and the same thing with oil in that year. It was due to Wall Street banks manipulating derivatives. It was due to biofuels, so-called, that were taking corn acreage, grain acreage away from agriculture to burn as automobile and transport fuels. And but anyway, we had this crisis in 2008, helped along by the Wall Street banks, and so several people had convinced the Pope, then it was Pope Benedict, to come to a special emergency World Food Conference in Rome, convened by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Well, another Pontifical Academy was so cocksure that they had convinced the Pope to give a papal blessing to GMO as the solution to world hunger, that they went public with a newspaper interview saying that GMO is harmless. I used to be attached to the United Nations in New York and lived in New York, where GMO is a staple of everyone's diet. I lived there for 3 years or however long. And look at me, I'm perfectly healthy. What a stupid, unscientific thing to say. But they were convinced that the Pope was going to give this blessing because they had presented a report done for them by the Monsanto lobby, by the way. Not, so that they would have a huge push forward for GMO as a solution to world hunger, a fraudulent thing as it was, but that was their game. Well, I was invited to come and tell the story of GMO as I told it in my book, but in person to a gathering of some 200 priests from this Catholic lay organization from all around the world. And it was in the 2 or 3 days just after this Rome conference. And lo and behold, the Pope came to the conference as had been planned. However, he did not say a single word of blessing for GMO. And the organizers of that, the U.S. Embassy in Rome and so forth, were reportedly absolutely livid because they had been assured that he would do that. Well, I found out what happened was that the head, the general director of the Pontifical Academy you mentioned, got a copy of my book from the priest in the U.S. that had read it, with the accompanying message: "This is not a request that you read Seeds of Destruction. This is an order. You must read this book as soon as possible." Well, he read it and was shocked by the eugenics, by the population reduction agenda of GMO, and reportedly, I was told, he was able, because he's the was the general secretary of this other pontifical academy, he was able to get an audience privately with the Pope and present the arguments of my book. And apparently, I can only judge by the results, apparently based on that, the Pope changed his mind about a support for GMO, and that's something the world should be thankful for, because that would have been a huge defeat for life on this planet.
Absolutely. William, what do you think about what's happening in the U.S. with the labeling issues, and now the Pompeo bill that would exempt all the state labelings? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that bill ought to be thrown in the fire and burned.
Yeah.
No, I think the beautiful thing about this labeling fight is it's a huge victory for humanity, the way it's evolving, because Monsanto was forced to spend tens of millions of dollars, the GMO industry lobby, tens of millions of dollars in California to defeat the labeling initiative, and the same in Washington State. But as a result of the release of information that they had spent that kind of money, a housewife in Utah, in the middle of nowhere — Utah is kind of out of the mainstream, East Coast, West Coast, or whatever. This housewife got so upset reading on the internet about what Monsanto had done that she took the initiative on herself to create a Facebook page called March Against Monsanto.
Right.
No organization, no NGO behind it. Last May, she said, on May, I forget the date, 13th or 15th, let's have a March Against Monsanto. Well, that Facebook page went viral, and I believe it was 52 countries around the world had marches against Monsanto. It wasn't organized by NGOs. NGOs sometimes can do useful things. Many times they can be bought because they need money for campaigns. So you can say, well, we'll give you $2 million if you campaign against the one-eyed turtle in Arizona or something like that instead of GMO. I'm picking that out of the air, but this was grassroots. I spoke at the event in Frankfurt, where I live, and these were not your normal anti-GMO organizers, and that's what terrified Monsanto and the GMO lobby. It came out of the blue, and it was massive. And since that time, even if the labeling is or isn't rammed through, like this bill, this national bill, which is absurd. If GMO is so good, why do you have to forbid it being labeled so that people can look at what their children are eating?
Well, I think this is just a stall tactic by the lobby.
Well, what are they afraid of? What is Monsanto afraid of?
Well, they're afraid that if their food is labeled, that's going to affect their bottom line.
Of course.
Of
course, because people don't want to eat poison. They don't want their children to eat poison.
Right.
And if rats die 5 times the rate of non-GMO rats, maybe humans are going to have some real horrendous disease issues after 20 years of eating a diet of 85% GMO-containing products. But no one is allowed to do research on that. So this is a real Frankenstein monster. And as I said at the beginning, George Herbert Walker Bush ought to be tried in a court of law, in a true court of law, and sentenced to life in prison for what he has pushed through with the doctrine of substantial equivalence, as should the heads of Monsanto and the other GMO corporations.
And it certainly has been a well-planned series of events. So what do you think we as individuals can do to stop Monsanto and these chemical companies from destroying the health of the planet and our children?
Oh, they're very simple. Do what the housewife did in Utah. Take an initiative. Don't be passive. I mean, that's I say it to myself all the time. Take responsibility for your own lives. Nobody's going to take it for you. George Herbert Walker Bush obviously is not going to take it for you. Neither will Bill Clinton. He supported Monsanto right up the wazoo. Neither will George W. Bush, and neither will Barack Obama. He's appointed the vice president of Monsanto to be the police pit bull over the Food and Drug Administration to make sure no negative FDA rulings come out on GMO. So take your own responsibility for your children, for your own lives, and for your health. And you can figure out much better ways than I can of doing that. I'm working almost 24/6 at least, 6.5, trying to do the research and get the information out that I can do with the gifts that God gave me. You have talents that I don't have, and the creativity that I don't have. So that's the kind of thing. But take responsibility moral responsibility for your own lives. It's the best advice because you're much more creative than I am.
Well said. And can you let our listeners know a little bit more about what is your website and tell us the name of a couple of the other books that you've written so
Sure.
they can check those out?
Well, I've written 5 of my books have been published in English and many other languages. The most well-known is called A Century of War, Anglo-American Oil Politics and the New World Order. Other titles include Seeds of Destruction, The Hidden Agenda of Genetic Manipulation, Myths, Lies, and Oil Wars. There's another one called Full Spectrum Dominance, Totalitarian Dictatorship and the New World Order. Totalitarian Democracy in the New World Order, sorry. Those are some of the titles. And then the other one is called The Gods of Money, Wall Street and the Death of the American Century. It goes into the takeover by Wall Street banks, essentially of the nation over the last 100 years or so, especially the last 45 years. And, all of my books have a common theme, as I realized a few years ago, and that is to shed light in dark corners where powerful people misuse that power to the detriment of mankind. And it's essentially all books about the same theme,
right.
In that sense. My website where people can go, and I work completely independently. I don't depend on the Rockefeller Foundation, you can believe, or the Soros Foundation for financial grants, like some so-called critical websites do, and that shapes how critical they are of some important issues or not. My website is WilliamEngdahl.com. Very simple. William Engdahl, ENGDAHL.com, or if you just Google my name, you'll come up with the website fairly in the first 2 or 3 hits. And there I have my books. They're available through Amazon or CreateSpace. If you click on the cover of a book that interests you, you can get information. And if you order it online through the website, I get a little bit more to pay my food bills and eat non-GMO food.
Oh, wonderful. And we'll also post your website on the show page to the
Great.
show
Okay.
so people can click right on. Well, thank you, William, for all the research you do and bringing us this important information. And recently I heard somebody saying that it's really important to understand this information and to just really have the knowledge about him. He said, what these wannabes are planning. And I love that, what these wannabes are planning. And
they want to be the gods over mankind, and
right.
in fact, they don't want it.
Right. And so we can take action accordingly.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like just sitting around judging corporations is the answer. They've got a lot of money, and they want us to believe that we have no personal power.
Yeah.
And we do. And it's up to each of us to reject GMOs and to educate one another and to stop buying their products.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is, in essence, how we're going to stop them. Our government's not going to do it. Our government's owned by the corporations, and so it's up to us. And we have the power.
Yeah, and it's we're 99.99% of the human species, normal human beings, and they're about 0.1%, and they're scared as can be that we'll figure that out. And I think we're figuring it out.
Yeah, we are. And so thank you again, William, and thanks to our listeners, and we'll be back next week with another interesting show. Next week, I'm going to be interviewing Thierry Vrain. He is a former biotech scientist. He worked for the Canadian biotech company for many years, and he is now a whistleblower. And he will be also speaking with us on the dangers of GMO, and this should be a really interesting show as well. So thank you, William, and enjoy your evening over there in Germany, and we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Well, I'm glad to do it. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.